Hi guys and welcome to a brand new episode of Getting Into TV. This week I'm joined by Rebs Jackson, who's going to teach me all about being a script supervisor in drama on shows like Casualty. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
What is a script supervisor?
So when I was on set for the first time, I'm very interested in writing and storytelling, which a lot of people conflate with script supervision, and they're kind of right, but mostly wrong. I saw a guy with a script and thought, oh, who are you? Went over to talk to him. But then he was actually teaching me about what he does, and I thought that's very interesting. The general consensus is you are effectively the eyes and ears of the editor on set, which kind of just encompasses everything. I work very closely with the directors during shooting, asking them if they think they might need another shot, or if a director thinks, oh, I'm done now. If I think, or maybe you haven't done a close-up on that prop, and it's so important, I'll offer it up and be like, do you want to do that? And if the director doesn't want to do, that's fine, because I've offered it. So I'm working very closely in that respect, and it's quite camera orientated in some ways.
To be a script supervisor, do you feel like you need to understand what, like the camera department? Do you need to understand like bits of it, or have a basic understanding at least, or like, what would you say?
I would say the main thing that I needed to learn was shot sizes, which isn't that difficult to do. I basically just watch YouTube videos of different shot sizes, and then I'd go away and like watch a TV show and then just try and just be like, that's a close-up, that's a mid close-up, that kind of thing. That was the only thing I really needed. I mean, the more I work, the more I'm starting to learn about camera, but it's not necessarily my job to know these things. I've done some jobs where they've asked me to do a camera log on the continuity sheets, and where I've mentioned like what the white balance is, what the frame rate is, but really it's kind of like, even if you don't necessarily understand it, if something changes, you can just write it down and it makes sense to the other people. If you don't know what that means, it makes sense because it's a change, which is very helpful with reshoots if they're trying to come back with a different crew. It's kind of, some people say that script supervisors are the continuity ladies, which is just so annoying because it's kind of true, but it's not. I mean, to people outside of the film industry, I might say, oh, you know the coffee cup in Game of Thrones, that's what I do to make sure that doesn't happen.
No, God, please, no, no, no.
Yeah.
It's sufficient to someone who doesn't really know, but in terms of like working in the industry, it's more that, yes, I will be asked hundreds of times a day, was it the left hand or right hand that I picked up that cup with? But it also goes a bit deeper than that in terms of like, in pre-prep, I'll read the script, and if I think, oh, that prop's vanished, or that character shouldn't be there because they went off to that place 10 pages ago, I'll flag that with the producers and the script editor as well. So it's kind of looking at the flow of the story continuity as well, and then also asking, is that necessary? Is this person meant to be in there? So during prep, first thing I do is I time all of the scripts, make a spreadsheet and just say, this scene is that length, that scene is that length. That's something that you can't really be trained to do. You just got to keep doing it and just see, oh, okay, I was wrong there. And sometimes you are going to be wrong. I think I've had like twice in my entire career where the time has been just right. But it's kind of, you have to think in your head about, oh, this person's saying this, I'm doing that. Some script supervisors act out. I don't personally do that. I just sit in my head, and if you're working on something that you haven't worked on before, it's always handy to ask, do you have like a map of the set or something to find out how long it takes people to get places, especially if it's a continuing drama. But that's kind of like what I do in pre-prep, and I do something called a master breakdown, which is like a massive document that if you work on bigger shoots, this is what's used by everybody about, okay, those things are nights, those things are days, that's what those are the props needed for tomorrow, that kind of thing. So it's just like a cheat sheet of everything, and then I use that as a tuition to say, oh, that prop's meant to be here if they're about to roll and they don't have it. So it's a lot of paperwork pre-prep, and then when you're on set, it's just trying to make that paperwork come alive on screen.
Yeah. Whenabouts do you come onto a production?
It depends what it is. For a film, I might be more involved earlier on, because it's normally quite a long time that you're then with the same crew. There's something like Casualty or Doctors. Casualty is, it's 1 week plus 2 days, I think, for prep. So sometimes I'll be asked by the production manager, oh, do you mind timing this script because we're in the production draft or we're in the medical draft? And if I've got time, I might be like, yeah, sure, I'll just do that now. But it's normally when they're in the production draft, getting ready, doing the revisions. It can be quite full on for the first few days, just in case there's like loads of revisions coming out, and I need to go back and redo everything and make sure it's up to date, because the main role for me in pre-prep is making sure that an episode of TV fits the time. So if I do a script and I say to them, oh God, it's coming in at about an hour and a half, they know they're going to have to cut that. So it's quite an important role, because if I get that wrong and I say it's massively over and it's actually under, it's sort of going to have to happen.
Yeah, hopefully that's never happened to you.
I think one episode of TV, it was under, but that was because we cut stuff as we were going along. So we had to go back and do reshoots, because that does happen a lot. There is a lot of chopping and
The notes that you make throughout the day, do they then go to the edit? Are they there? Where do the notes go that you make that day?
It depends again on what the production company is like and who you're working for. I think with script supervision, it's so subjective and people have different ways of doing things. But for something like Casualty, for example, is the most regimented one, which is really good for me because it means that I have my evenings free afterwards. But it's kind of like I have a DPR that I do at the end of the day, which is just this is the time we started, this is the time we had lunch, this is the time we first shot, this is the time we first shot after lunch, and then I'll take the time on the call sheet and just say if we went over or under that, and then for each individual scene that we shot, I'll say if we've completed it, how long I thought it was going to be and how long it is, and then just keep a running total of how much we still got left to shoot for production. So that's at the end of the day. But at lunchtime, I send off the editor's log, which is like, imagine a spreadsheet with just very briefly which one is the preferred take by the director, or if there's multiple preferred takes, what time that was shot and what the shot was. And that's for edit to very quickly just go through the rushes to send them off to the editor. But then I have to send the more detailed notes, which is the line script. So that's the size for the day with lines, tramlines on, to just show how much we've covered. Now, this was traditionally done by editors like 10 years ago. So it's basically that for each bit of the scene that we cover, I draw a line on to say we've covered that, and just say what the shot was and what the slate number was. So that if I look at the page, if there's any part of it with no line on it, we haven't done that. And then there's the other lot, which is the continuity sheet, where I basically say take one was the best, take two wasn't very good because someone missed a line, and then just writing notes about, oh, the camera went off, someone knocked a prop over with the time. It's quite scary when you first start to do that. But
and listening to you now, and it sounds like there's so much more than what I initially thought. Like, I feel like I am one of them people that, even though I've worked on a set, I probably was one of them people that thought you were just kind of like a continuity person. I knew you did more, but I didn't know exactly what. But it sounds that there's so much that goes into it.
It is. I think it's kind of like a closely kept secret between the script supervisors. I had no idea when I first started out, when I first met Paul, what it was that he actually did on a day-to-day basis. But you'll normally see a script supervisor, sometimes with an iPad, sometimes by hand, with this massive folder just drawing lines and just writing. And you're trying to like watch the screen and write at the same time because you can't miss both. So it's definitely something good for someone who can multitask like that. I think for me, it's the perfect job because I've got ADHD, so it's just perfect for me. It's just like scratching that. I've got to do that. So it's kind of, it can be quite tiring.
Yeah, it's constantly keeping you busy, I suppose, mentally as well. Like, you've got to keep on your toes. What was your route into TV like?
I think I always summarize it as a fluke, a dream, and a lot of transferable skills. I come from Cornwall. I have a background where none of my family went to uni, let alone work in TV. So I started like from the bottom. but I didn't do any like film studies at GCSE or A-level or anything like that. And I actually went to uni to do English literature at Cardiff, which I deliberately chose because I wanted to do something film orientated. And there were a lot of like film modules like Hitchcock and that kind of thing. But I knew from the age of about 13, I wanted to work in film, TV, didn't know what, just wanted to tell stories and that kind of thing. So I always knew I want to do this and this. So I joined the Film Society and I just kept putting myself out there and kept saying, I want to do this and this. But in that time, I was working at part-time in a shoe shop whilst also working in the student union with loads of like room bookings, Excel spreadsheets, that kind of thing. And then I saw a job advertised on the Cardiff Uni job boards looking for someone to shadow a producer unpaid. So I applied, and when I got there, I was interviewed by this wonderful woman who was talking about the amount of transferable skills that I had never thought would be necessary for working in film was actually too much to work unpaid. So I actually got my first job as a locations trainee because she said, I want you in the production office, but we don't have any other roles. I thought, I'll do anything, I'm willing to learn. So I worked alongside the line producer for about a month, but then I kept saying to her, I want to do this, I want to write, I want to be involved in storytelling things, and just kept saying it and saying it to literally everybody. When I was on set, spoke to everyone, and I spoke to the script supervisor at the time, who was called Paul, and he said that he trained through a course at Pinewood that was over like a weekend with loads of other script supervisors. I thought, oh, cool. But that was in December 2019, which was a horrible time.
Yeah. That wasn't really the best.
But then I kept trying to reach out to people, and I worked so hard on that first job, and I made such a good connection with that company that when opportunities arose to do remote work during the pandemic, they had me on board. So I went from locations trainee to a script reader for about 2 months, and then I worked as an interactive script production assistant virtually. And then I did that job again and again, then did some film marketing for the company as well, because it's quite a small company. And then I think it was February 2021, I published my CV on the Screen Alliance Wales directory and got a job in Bristol as an APOC, which was great. And I learned how to do like script breakdown and things. And then I went on back to the original company to be a production coordinator. So all of this had come from the transferable skill that I had at uni about researching, unfortunately to say it, but Excel spreadsheets for the weigh-in, and just trying to like also just speaking to everybody.
Yeah, I mean that I like completely agree that speaking to people, as horrible as it sounds when you're first starting out, because I was such a introverted, like shell of a human, like I just did not want to talk to anyone. I hated it. But working in telly and like forcing myself to go to these events and forcing myself to talk to people, it generally does help. And people, like you said, people will generally listen and generally help and give you that first step. What is the job progression like for a script supervisor then? I know earlier on you mentioned that there was various other roles that you've done before, which I hadn't ever heard of. So I wouldn't mind if you covered them as well, just to briefly say what they are.
Then I worked as an interactive script production assistant, which is a new role in the industry. That was an interactive film. So I was basically using an interactive script tool to program in 790-page interactive script into like a flow chart, like a choose your own adventure thing, so that the producer and director can both play through it, but then when they edit that, they then put the clips into the nodes. So it makes it into a game. And then I stepped up as an assistant production coordinator for a HBO TV show. And that was a lot of neck check things about reading through scripts and just checking that everything is above board with names and that kind of thing. And then went back to the interactive production side and was a production coordinator dealing with sending stuff to actors because we're all shooting virtually and that kind of thing. And saying it kind of doesn't sound like any of this is relevant, but thinking about it, the major thing with the script supervisor is being able to break down scripts, which is what I did in the script PA and everything. And it's just like critical analysis of just being able to read and pick out information from scripts.
You're like a custodian of some sort.
Yeah.
You're like, you're not the one writing it or creating it. You're just more there to make sure it gets done.
Yeah, I think you've got to learn how the script is a tool to tell the story, not the story itself, which is obviously different for writers. And I've met so many people that have messaged me, or I've met them at networking events, and they said, "Oh, you write?" I'm like, I do write, yeah, but no, that's not my job. And it's so awkward.
I feel like we kind of covered this, but what skills do you think you need to have as a script supervisor? Anything that we've not mentioned, and anything yet?
A lot of people say memory. Obviously, that is really good, but also it's not so necessary if you are good at note taking. So my memory is pretty bad sometimes, but my note taking skills are pretty good. So it's quite high pressure sometimes. And you just got to remember to be patient and keep your head on the prize, basically. And it's just kind of like, if someone says, "I need to know this," I'll be like, "Okay, let me check." And I go and check, because if I just panic and say, "Oh, it's the right hand," and then we film half the scene and then it turns out it was wrong because I didn't check. It's one of the biggest skills is advocating for yourself in like any way. So to just be like, I need to be here for that rehearsal because someone doesn't understand what your role is. It's like, no, I need to be here to make sure it's okay. I don't mean like being aggressive at all, but just to advocate and be like, okay, so this is my job. I need to do this. Can I do that job, please? It's kind of a big one. So I think there are a lot of people now who come through film school who've never heard of script supervisors. It's not something necessarily really taught in film school, not an undergrad level anyway. And a lot of people can be, they think you're telling them that they're doing something wrong. Or I keep trying to remind people, oh no, I'm here to make sure we all do our best.
Yeah.
And sometimes actors can be a bit like, "Oh, you're telling me I've done this wrong." I'm like, no, I'm just saying, "Oh, can we go just match that tape because the director liked that one?" So it's all about learning how to talk to people, being patient, having good organization skills, but also just picking your battles and thinking ahead. Because like, if I went running up to a first AD every time something was minorly wrong, we'd be there for like 20 hours just trying to do one day of work.
Yeah, I mean, the 12-hour day would not be a 12-hour day at all. I mean, no one would go home. You would live on set.
Never go home. So it's kind of like, if someone says a line wrong, or like they alter it slightly, but the camera's not on them, I'll make a note and say, they said this line 2 of this scene wrong, but I won't necessarily go running up to the director unless I hear someone say, "Oh, we're gonna use that take." Like, that's the most important skill, is to use your eyes, use your ears. Like, I'm always sitting there with the cams on, looking so antisocial, but then I can hear like everything. "Oh, that scene's wrong. Oh, that lighting's moved," because they might not necessarily tell you.
Yeah, I suppose just listening to you, a script supervisor has so much to do on set. Like, you've got to keep your eyes everywhere, and I didn't realize just how much you got to keep your eyes and ears and just kind of be in the zone, which is pretty amazing, to be fair. That I don't feel like I could do that. I feel like I just get distracted and just start talking to someone. Am I right in thinking you did something with Screen Alliance Wales?
Yeah, so after I did the production coordinator job, I saw an advert for script supervisors training on line Screen Alliance Wales. By this point, I'd known for about 2.5 years that I wanted to go into script supervision, because I thought it's a great way to learn everything. Also, it's just a good way to get my foot in the door and I just really wanted to be involved in that creative process on set more than in a production office. So I applied and said that, and I was trained by the wonderful Sue Jeffries, who is a former script supervisor, who was great. And she laid it on the table and said, this is stressful, this job, but it's so rewarding when that episode of TV comes out and it's perfect. I'm like, yeah, I did that. And it's just kind of, it's one of those things like exercising, you're going for a run and it's like, oh yeah, I've done that. You don't want to do it, but then yeah. So I trained with Sue for a week with a couple of other people. Half of the group had made the mistake and thought that it was a writing course. And half of the group were there for script supervisors, and I trained with 2 other people that are still working as script supervisors in and around Wales. And Sue basically taught us about eye lines, which is not something I'd ever heard of before, where you can't cross the line. So if someone is looking that way to talk to someone, when you then shoot them, they have to be looking that way. But it's one of those things a bit like language, where there's always exceptions if people want to cross the line, but it's generally kind of like, you don't really do that because it can make the audience feel a bit weird. And she taught us a lot about perspectives, because it's a bit weird when you first have to do this, but like if you change the camera angle, you might then have to like cheat and move a sofa in the back a bit that way, so it looks like it's in the same place. And some people don't understand that, and someone in the art department might say, oh my god, you've moved. I'm like, no, it's in the same place as if you look through the camera, which is it's so weird. And she was just teaching us all about the importance of taking breaks between jobs sometimes, because it's quite a lot, it's physically demanding, and what kind of thing you need in your kit. So I highly recommend one of those clicky pens, all the different colors, where I use an iPad now, but I do everything by hand still through scriptation. So I'm still drawing everything just digitally now, because the scripts are like this big in the folder. But in terms of like training, I know Sri and I as well are keen to do more of those training courses, because it was really, really good. Pinewood and some of the other bigger studios often do courses, but not necessarily in Wales. So you would have to travel to somewhere like London for that. There is the Screen Skills Trainee HGTV Trainee Finder. They're not taking script supervisors in the upcoming cohort, but they are the year after, because I think a lot of money was being diverted into like art trainees and things rather than script supervisors, because again, it's kind of like no one really knows what script supervisors do unless you talk to one. Sarah Putt Associates is a great one for training people, especially women. And I'm pretty sure that the ITV training scheme sometimes do in-house script supervisor training, but the best thing that you can do is ask a script supervisor if you can shadow them or work experience. It's probably going to be unpaid, which is really frustrating, but I've never met a script supervisor that doesn't want to talk to someone and train someone, because most of us don't have assistants, and it can be so full on and everyone's so busy on set, a bit lonely. So I've had people come up to me between takes and be like, so what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'll show you. And if you don't ask, you don't get.
What advice would you give to new starters, or to yourself starting out? What would you give to yourself?
The first thing I said to everybody is there are 2 books that they should read. One is Beyond Continuity by Mary Saborski, which is more the American slating system, which has come into play over here, and lots of other script supervisor things. And the other one, which is slightly harder to get, is Continuity Supervisor by Avril Rowlands, who is like a legend in the UK in the script supervising community. Obviously, like, reading books only gets you so far, but it's a fantastic way to find out what a script supervisor does and what you're expected to do, because slating can be quite scary, and you are effectively in charge of slating on set. It's not the camera department. So you should say in the beginning, when we change something, I want you to go up a slate, please. Let me know when you've reloaded the cards, that kind of thing. You can always do your own work by like keeping an eye to see if the role has changed on the camera. But I wouldn't have known to do that, and I wouldn't have known what an M board was or tail sticks were if I hadn't have read these books. So that's massive help. And I think just it's helpful watching some YouTube videos, because a lot of people have said like what's in their kit and that kind of thing, but just having an attitude of being ready to do anything, because you don't know what your day is going to consist of. Like my first ever day on casualty, I threw people off a balcony, just watching them as they fell, and we were watching, and I was like, oh my god, are they going to die? They're fine, obviously, but we had 2 actors who had to fall off into a pile of glass. And I've done fire stunts, I've done green scene, I've worked with horses and dogs and children. I've done an ice skating shoot at 3 o'clock in the morning. I think in terms of like uni or going to film school, personally, I think if someone wants to be a script supervisor, please go to film school if you want to go to film school, because the amount of short films that I've watched that don't have a script supervisor, 9 times out of 10, I can now tell, because something's moved or someone's eyeliner is wrong. And I, just from my experience, I've never seen a student film that has a script supervisor. And we can always do with more script supervisors, because it's a traditionally women's role back in like Hollywood history. It's a very old role. And a lot of people are retiring and moving on as they're getting older. And that's why there's like such a push now to hire more script supervisors, because they're just a massive vacuum. So if it's something that someone is very interested in, definitely go and pursue that. And I think film school probably could help. I can't speak from experience because I didn't go. But I don't think I've met a script supervisor that hasn't been to uni, but I think that's more just a coincidence, really. I think it's helpful to learn transferable skills if you get involved in like student uni and stuff, or you do work experience or a job or that kind of thing. And it's always good for like, especially if you're doing a humanities subject, like researching and to prove that you can write particularly in that kind of thing. But other than that, I think it's kind of, I probably could have started out doing an apprenticeship anyway, not in script supervising, but just anything, and just working my way up anyway. And I do think it's a very interesting job for people that are interested in storytelling, either visually or in terms of writing, because if you want to write, but you also want to work on set, which is great, because then you get to learn how things work. Script supervisor is a great job for that, because you can just learn, okay, so if I write that page, that's what's going to happen, that's how an actor interprets it, that's how a director blocks it. So it's a very interesting job to do.
Thank you so much for talking to me. Like I've already said to you, like it's opened my eyes, and I really hope that anyone watching this has opened their eyes, or at least like they've got an interest and it's helped them. So thank you so much for like breaking down them script supervisor barriers that I had that I didn't know I had. But yeah, it's been really interesting. If you have any other questions, please comment them down below, and I'm sure we can answer them eventually. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.